If you are thinking about positive reinforcement, for one, it has to follow the behavior. It's not something that happens before the behavior. Reinforcement is always part of the consequence. And it's usually a preferred item, activity, person, or place. You do not know truly whether or not you have a reinforcer, though, until you've actually measured the future frequency of the behavior. So I think that I might have a reinforcer, and I can do things to try to guess what might be reinforcing, but I can't tell truly if something is a reinforcer until I see whether or not that person's going to do that behavior again. Because again, a reinforcer is something that's conditional, right? It's a reinforcer under a certain condition, but not a reinforcer under all conditions. It may take $5 for me to do one thing, but it may take $500 for me to do something else. So if you pay me $5 every time I flossed, I would floss a lot because that's a pretty easy response. But if you paid me $5 every time I check my oil, it's probably not going to happen. So $5 is a reinforcer under one condition, but not under another. So you have to think about that as, again. All right, so let's take this example. Read it along with me kind of in your head. Johnny is a 5-year-old boy with a speech delay. He has limited and repetitive speech. He sees his mom in the kitchen. He goes up to her and says, "Can I have juice, please, Mom?" His mom says, "Good talking," and gets him a glass of juice. What do you think the reinforcer is? Okay, I heard verbal praise and I heard juice. Okay, does anybody disagree with either of those? No? Okay, now let's take that example and let's switch it up a little bit, okay? Because remember, what's the definition of a reinforcer? Increases the future frequency of the behavior. Okay, so now let's reread this. Johnny goes into the kitchen and he says, "Can I have some juice, please, Mom?" And Mom says, "Good talking," and walks away. Does Johnny ask for juice again? Mm-mm. All right, let's take the other part. Johnny goes into the kitchen. He asks for juice. She doesn't say anything and just hands him the juice. Is he going to ask for juice again? He's probably going to ask for juice again because he wanted the juice. He got what he wanted. So it's nice for you to tell me that I did a good job talking. I appreciate it, I really do. But does it make me engage in the behavior again in the future? Because the part that makes me engage in the behavior again in the future is the part that's the reinforcer. Okay? I like the verbal praise. Like every day I go to work and people are like, "Oh, you did a really good job. You do blah, blah, blah." We tell people all the time that they do a great job, but I'm not going to come to work every single day for you to tell me that I'm doing a good job. I like it, but it's not going to maintain that behavior. There might be other things that if you tell me that I do a good job, that might actually maintain my behavior. Like I might want to, like if somebody says, "Oh, you have a really nice outfit on today," I might wear that outfit again because I got that compliment from that person, but it wouldn't necessarily make me do something that's more effortful. So you have to kind of think about what is the response that you're reinforcing and how is it related to that consequence. So not everything is going to be a reinforcer in every single situation. Okay, so for those people who say rewards don't work for my kid, these are some of the things that you might want to check. So who's used a reinforcement procedure? Who's tried to use a reinforcement procedure? Okay, nobody back there? Some people, a couple people back there? Have you guys used any reinforcement procedures? Yeah, okay, so mostly everybody, whether they know it or not, has used some sort of a reinforcement procedure, okay? You're trying to motivate people to make changes, do things, right? So if it's not working, one thing that you can do is check to see whether or not they got the reward following the behavior. So did they get it right away, or was there a delay? So like we had mentioned earlier, sometimes when there's a delay, it's not a very effective reinforcer. It might be a reinforcer, but it didn't get connected close enough to the behavior for it to motivate us to make a change. One of the other things that you could consider is, what does the child have already? Okay, so do they have everything that they need? Do they really need to engage in the behavior that you want them to engage in order to get access to that? So here's an example. I'll go back to the money example, right? So you said that you would do something for $50. You would read a book for $50 in 2 days that you didn't like, right? So what if you won the lottery? Would you still read a book in 2 days that you didn't like if I was going to give you $50? Nope. So you wouldn't do that anymore because you already had the thing that I'm trying to use as a reinforcer. This happens a lot because people don't realize how related these things are. So let's say you're going to use a DVD as a reinforcer. Kids like to watch a certain movie. My favorite movie is SpongeBob. So you're going to say, all right, I'm going to use SpongeBob. And if you do X, Y, and Z, I'm going to let you watch SpongeBob. Well, let's say at school, he watched a whole bunch of SpongeBob and he already had that episode today, so he's not interested in that. Or let's say he can play with the computer, but you've restricted the TV. So when you go on the computer, what can you do on the computer? You can watch SpongeBob. You can do all kinds of things. You can play computer games that are related to SpongeBob. Let's say you were going to use M&Ms as a reinforcer. That's what everybody does when they do ABA, right? They use M&Ms. So when you are going to give a reinforcer of M&Ms, you're going to probably withhold M&Ms and you're going to save those. We do this like potty training and stuff like that, right? So if you go potty, I'll give you an M&M, but the kid has free access to all the ho-hos and all the, chocolate cake and everything else in the closet that they want. So it's not worth it for them to do the thing to get the M&M because they've got all these other things out in the environment that we call competing reinforcers. And we all live in a world where we got lots of these going on. We don't restrict a lot for people anymore, right? Because you can get it really fast. You can always go through the drive-thru. Everybody's got a sippy cup or a drink or something. So all of these things are important. And if you have enough things to have your needs met, you're not going to be willing to do something, particularly something that you view as very difficult, in order to get access to that other thing that that person wants or has. So that goes along with the next one, which is, did the child get too much? So we talked about satiation already with the lunch. If you're full, you're not going to be motivated to work for food. If you're already if you're not thirsty anymore, you're not going to be motivated to work for a drink. If you have all the money that you need, you're not going to be motivated to earn money. So if the child has had too much of something, they're not going to be willing to work for it, even if it's something that they like. The other thing is if it's too little, and we discussed this with the book, where she wouldn't work for the book if it was $5, but she would work for the book, or she would read the book if it was for $50. So you have to make sure that the effort matches the reinforcement contingency as well. Sometimes, do you remember when we talked a little bit about functional communication and echolalia? And I said that sometimes people don't use the words the way that we would intend for them to be used. Sometimes with our kids, they ask for the same thing over and over again, but they really don't want the same thing over and over again. They just don't understand that there are different words for different things. So they might say cookie, and then you give them a cookie, and then they say cookie, and then you give them a cookie, and they say cookie, and you give them a cookie, but they don't really want a cookie, they want a hug, or they want a glass of milk, or they want something else, but they don't know to change the response. So sometimes when you have kids that ask for the same thing over and over again, you still need to maybe assess, do they really want the thing that I'm giving them, particularly for lower functioning kids. It's something that you want to look at. All right. So we talked about this already. The magnitude of the reinforcer is almost always the fundamental problem that people have with reinforcement. The work that they're asking them to do is too hard for the reinforcer that they're getting. So if you're not getting a significant change, that's the first thing that you want to look for. This is a technique that we use quite a bit. As you're thinking about reinforcement, don't just think about things that you can hand people, but you can also think about activities that people can do. So this is called the Premack principle, and this is when we use a lower frequency behavior followed by a higher frequency behavior. So sometimes people call this the grandma principle, where you say, if you eat your dinner, then you can have dessert. It's the same kind of concept. So what this might look like with a child with autism is, for example, you have a little girl, Kathy, likes to twirl pieces of string. She typically gets out the stringing beads activity in her classroom, and she twirls the string over and over again. So as an intervention to teach appropriate play skills, Kathy's teacher instructs her to string 3 beads and then allows her to twirl the string as a reward for playing with the toy appropriately. So this is just a simple, changing up the order of things and using the thing that they already want to do as the reinforcer for something that they don't want to do. So it's just a simple technique to think about as you go forward. When you're thinking about teaching skills, one of the most important things that we have to remember is we can either be aversive or we can be reinforcing. And if we're constantly paired with work, when you guys go in as a behavioral tech, a lot of times what are you asked to do? You're asked to do behavior plans, you're asked to work with them, you're asked to do things and make them do things that they don't want to do, where when you're not there, they get to pretty much do whatever they want. So if you're going in and you need to encourage a child to do something, you need to make sure that you're also reinforcing. So you need to break the task down simple enough so that you can give lots and lots and lots and lots of reinforcement, because you want the child to run to you, not run away from you. You're going to get a lot more bang for your buck if you guys can be more reinforcing. And the more reinforcement you give, the more reinforcing you become, because you get paired with those things. And that's a very powerful tool that you guys can have. So make sure that you're always working with a child who's smiling. And if they're not smiling, then try to do something to make them smile. But you have to do it following appropriate behavior, which means that sometimes you don't ask them to do anything, because when you ask them to do something, they don't engage in appropriate behavior. So you really have to think about that, and you have to have a good ratio. And I'm not saying that you're never going to have opportunities when you have problem behaviors, but your times where you're reinforcing have to outweigh the problem behaviors. And that means that sometimes you adjust what you're asking them to do so that you can have the opportunity to do that. If you don't, and you're constantly paired with negative interactions, then you will become a punisher. And you will have a really hard time getting kids to do what they need to do if you're aversive. All right, so when you're using reinforcement, you really need to think about not only what's going to get them to change their behavior in the moment, but what is the long-term plan for the reinforcer. Because if we go in and we implement a procedure based on reinforcement that gets the person to change their behavior, but we don't have a plan to keep that in place all the time, right? You guys will have a plan, and the goal is to no longer have the plan someday, right? So if we add reinforcement to the environment and it's not the thing that they would naturally get, what's going to happen when we take the reinforcer away? It's going to go back to baseline. So do you guys know what that means? Where you have a treatment that gets implemented, the variable that you changed was adding a reinforcer. So I add a reinforcer, I get an increase in behavior. I take the reinforcer away, the behavior goes back down to the way that it was before. And that piece that you were talking about earlier about generalization, that piece that is missing is we didn't connect the behavior that we wanted to see to the behavior that they would, or to the reinforcer that they would naturally get in the environment. So if you have to use some kind of a contrived reinforcement, you have to somehow have a plan to get it back to what the natural reinforcer is. So let me ask you guys a question. What's the natural reinforcer for you guys to say hello and goodbye to somebody? Common courtesy. What was the other one that you said? Somebody said, say it again?
Someone to say it back.
For someone to say it back, to have some sort of a social interaction, right? Has anybody ever had a plan that they've run or read a plan that was written for a child with social skills deficits to greet other people? Okay, so what skills are involved with accessing that natural reinforcer? What do you have to have in order to want somebody to say hi or bye back to you?
Another individual person.
You have to have another individual, but what kind of skills do you have to have? Social skills. You have to want their social attention. You have to want to be engaged with them. You have to care whether or not they are attending to you. So if we implement something where, let's say we can get the kid, we bring the kid up to you and we say hi, and Susie says hi, and we give Susie an M&M, and then we take Susie over here, and then somebody else gives Susie an M&M for doing that, and we can maybe even fade it so that not every single time she's going to get an M&M, but eventually we're going to stop giving her M&Ms for that, right? And then she's supposed to just want to greet the other person, but if she doesn't have any of the other skills to sustain that, you're gonna have wasted all that time, because as soon as you pull the plan out, then you're gonna get a return to baseline. So that's a really important thing to think about. What's the thing that we need to focus on changing with a plan like that? What do you guys think? Not just the reinforcer, because if they don't have the skills to sustain that natural reinforcer, what are we going to change? You have to work on the skills. You have to teach a different task. Just like when we were talking about the reading, sometimes it's not appropriate to teach certain things at certain times. Not everything is going to be appropriate to teach at every time. And sometimes that might seem like the most logical thing to teach, but if you can't sustain it, then you're going to have basically a waste of that person's time, of all that time that you spent teaching it. So you really have to think about, remember I talked about applied with applied behavior analysis, and applied means they're going to use it in the real world. And of course, greetings are things that we all use, but can they use it right now? And is it functional for them? Is it going to get one of their needs met, or is it going to make you feel better because you want them to say hi and bye to you? So think about some of those things, because we have lots and lots of skills to choose from, because these kids have a lot of deficits and we have a little bit of time. So we want to pick the things that are going to sustain and really work within the natural environment. So what's the natural reinforcer for asking for juice? Getting juice, right? So if I teach a child to ask for what they want, that's not going to go anywhere, because when they learn to ask for what they want, they're going to ask for what they want, and then sometimes they're not going to get it, but a lot of times they are, right? So that's going to sustain that particular behavior. And there are lots of things like that. Like there are other things like, sharing, or, some of those kinds of things that maybe they want attention, teaching them a way to get the thing that they want. This particular segment should be very closely related to the skills that you learned in the last module. You need to take the function that you identified for the problem behavior, and you need to turn that in to the reinforcer that you use for the new behavior that you're going to pick. Does that make sense to everybody? So remember at the beginning of this, I said you want to increase behavior and you want to decrease behavior. There are two ways to change behavior, and all of these kids have skill deficits. So we want to see what the problem is. What's the problem behavior? And let's say they're tantruming, right? Why are they tantruming? Are they tantruming to get out of something? Are they tantruming to get something? Why are they tantruming? Now, if I can teach them something that gets them the same thing that they want from the problem behavior, now what I've done is I've used that natural reinforcer, and I've decreased the problem behavior and I've increased the appropriate behavior all at the same time. Does that make sense? That would be a really good plan. All right. Do you guys have any questions on reinforcement? Kind of wailed through that one really fast. Okay? All right. Let's take your quiz.